Welcome, 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 everybody, to the very first episode of Start With You. I am Jon Brence, and I'm super happy to have with me a legend in our space. A legend that I've worked with for so many years. One of the greatest, just minds, genuine people that I have had the privilege of working with over the years. The one, the only Josh, aka Unigeek. Hello!
Hello, everyone.
Hi! Also,
thank you for that grand introduction.
I mean,
very much appreciate it.
you're the one with the grand introduction because your hair is on point right now, Josh. I have to say, you've been embracing the color as of late, from what I've been seeing.
I have.
Why is that? Why are you diving in and expressing through more colorfulness, I would say.
So that started with pink last year.
Yeah.
Right after was it after? No, it was right before my spouse shaved their head.
Yes.
At the start of chemotherapy.
Yes.
So that was a big deal. They weren't going to be able to express themselves through their hair anymore, and I asked them if it would bother them if I did it in their stead, and they said no. So I started to explore. I went pink, burgundy, blue, shaved it off, did some shaved solidarity with them for a while.
Hell yeah.
And then it got really, really hard to maintain that. Reshaving my head every other day. So I let it grow back, and then my goal was to start coloring it again once I had enough hair.
Oh, geez. Well, I'm glad that you're embracing the color. I'm glad that you were able to celebrate with color through what I anticipate to be, it was a difficult time. Chemo was no joke, having had many family members go through that as well. Tell me a little bit about how are you doing overall with everything? I mean, granted, the world was burning there for a while. You went through that journey. You're embracing color. You're bringing brightness to people's lives. You literally take care of people every single day. Tell me a little bit about that.
As far as the journey, since that was kind of there was two questions, but that's okay. It was a challenging journey to support my spouse through their process. They just had another scare. They had a surgery, and then they're still cancer-free, still in remission. They just have one less internal body part now that was removed via surgery, so that can't get cancer. So that's an improvement. But yeah, it's been an up and down journey full of a lot of changes, a lot of discoveries. Delving into a completely new lifestyle change, moving across the country a bunch of times over the past few years, going from, starting in 2017 in California, leaving California in 2017 to move to Oklahoma, then to Maryland in 2020, and then just at the end of this past year, moving to Washington. So it's been a lot of moving around twice during a pandemic, to add to bringing another person into our home in our now polyamorous lifestyle, and living with another person who is essentially like a roommate to me, who's my my metamor, as we say. He's my partner's partner, and having that be a change, getting my own, or doing my own self-exploration, and finding out about my own neurodivergence over the past, but now it's been almost a year.
What did you discover? What did you discover as part of that journey for yourself?
So when I was having trouble I could thank polyamory for this, because I was having trouble with hyperfocus. I would go on a date with somebody new, and it's all I could focus on. So my spouse would say, "Hey, check in when you get there, so I know you're alive," and then I would completely forget.
Oh, geez. So you like the proof of life texts just weren't happening, and they were just like, "Oh, great, you've been kidnapped. You're now somewhere."
Or I would remember like 45 minutes, 60 minutes later, like, "Oh, whoops."
Oh, jeez.
I was supposed to do that.
Oh my heavens. So you were discovering like focus has been an issue. And you do a lot of things. Like we'll talk about your professional career here in a little bit, but okay, so you're finding that you were was it distractions, or just you had to maintain focus on only one thing? Like what was it? Was it the world was just very busy, or
it was just excitement. If I get really excited about something, it's just tunnel vision.
Yeah.
hone in on that thing. That's why I mean, I can look back at now as experiences when I was younger, when I was preteen, teenager, doing things like building Kinects and Legos that I still really enjoy. And I remember working on a Kinect set for 14 hours one day.
Holy heavens.
I think I stopped to eat and go to the bathroom, and I would just go back, and my thumbs really hurt the next day.
Well, yeah, those kits were not friendly to our any appendages, whether it's like actually working on your fingers or stepping onto them, which I frequently did as a kid.
Yes. Thankfully, Kinects are less deadly to be stepped on.
Way deadly, way less deadly.
Just because they make things in grander scale, typically at a lower cost, so they're very effective in making fun things to look at and engage with.
Yeah. So you found like tactical focus is an aspect. Like you obviously would dive in on things. This is even from my experience working with you in the past. So just a little bit of background for those who are listening. We worked on a site back in 2011, I think it kicked off, and it ran for several years, called Unigeek, which was effectively trying to solve for when the conventions stop, where do the convention goers go who are fans of anime and pop culture, you name it. And Josh, Unigeek was very, very, very focused. I mean, they ran full hosting for the entertainment set, the area of Anime Expo. They were doing full casting. Like, you are somebody who, when you are given a task, you run at it with there's no apprehension. There's no holding back. You go
reckless
abandon, throw the tables out of the way. If there's people, God bless them, because who knows where they're going to end up. But you've always had that skill, but you noticed recently, like, it was starting to affect relationships or like how you approach regular life, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I may have never discovered these specific challenges if I hadn't been in a relationship where we gave each other permission to date other people. And explore what that looks like. And I'm still working on that and making improvements and setting up new pieces for myself and like structure and things that help remind me to do the things that I want to do that they just don't come into my brain. Because I realize that my life is very compartmentalized. And I talk about it, and a lot of people talk about it when they put on a hat. Like, I'm putting on my work hat. I'm putting on my dad hat. And I think about that like very real. It's a very real time thing for me.
Do you have little gestures or things that you do to know when you're switching between those hats? Like, are there areas of your house?
It's interesting that you say that. Yes, I use geolocation for that purpose. So like my office here is definitely used for that, and it's one of the reasons why I'm very against working where I sleep. So like having my office in my bedroom, it's inherently unhealthy. I know that some people obviously can't afford the space to not do that, but having some sort of routine that breaks up those spaces, or even just having like a divider, but so that you can't physically see your bed while you're at your desk and vice versa. Because it was one of the things we were considering, just because having another adult in the house means that we need an additional bedroom. Because, half the nights I spend next to my spouse and half the nights they spend next to their other partner. And I still need my home office because I need to have a private space legally for my work.
Of course.
And, it needs to be that way.
Will it need to continue to scale?
Having it really, I guess it depends. They're not looking, my spouse is not looking for any more nesting partners, as we would say. Eventually, I'd like to have another nesting partner, so that would potentially require another room. But that does get more challenging rent-wise.
Oh, no, of course. I mean, rent will only continue to increase on that front. It's very interesting, like how you say geolocation of your home, as far as like being able to separate living quarters from working quarters, from sleeping quarters, where you eat, like starting to separate all of those have been a huge benefit, I know, to myself and many other creatives and people who are working, especially getting through quarantine of the pandemic for the past several years. That was incredibly difficult. I I guess with the shifts during quarantine, as we're looking at, what had occurred, you went through all these moves, you're making transitions in the lifestyle, that it feels like it's a lot. Has it felt like a lot to you to take all that on?
Yes. So it's felt like a lot, especially between August and I guess December, January, because we were still in August, we were still in Maryland, and then December is when I got here. They got here, both of them got here November, or well, their other partner already lived in Washington, so that was kind of easy for them. It's a move, 15-minute move versus a 3,000-mile move.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And yeah, so it's been a pretty tremendous change, and my challenges with handling many of the changes were what led me to get additionally assessed for autism and then get that diagnosis, because I didn't feel like all the pieces connected with just an ADHD diagnosis. I was like, it's just, I just kept reading, I kept doing more research. I'm now a certified clinical autism spectrum disorder specialist. Just added another chunk onto the end of my name.
Seriously, we were just talking about hats. You have professionally, you wear so many hats as well. I guess when you discovered which area of the spectrum you were landing on, or how you identify, I guess, how did that change perspectives, or did that cause you to reflect on your past and how you approach life?
Hugely. Like I reflect on my whole family, my parents' behavior. I think my parents are neurodivergent, most likely. It explains a lot of my mother's behavior and a lot of her negative behavior in particular. Because I remember when I was graduating from my undergrad in Monterey, and I was having a conversation with my dad's parents, and they were telling me about about some stories from when my parents were dating. When my parents were, I think 19, and my parents are the same age. My dad is literally 1 month older than my mom to the day.
That's wild.
And yeah, right. So yeah, same year, 15th of the month, one month apart.
They might have been at the same party, is what we're saying. Something the parents might have been in similar areas. But so you reflected on this. You started discovering stuff about your family. Like, okay, this is all starting to add up for me. Do you feel like these, like, as you were reflecting in the past, of like, okay, the way that I was approaching the world, now that I can see it through a clear lens of, oh, I've had this has been a part of me. Do you think that's what attracted you to what you do professionally as a social worker? You just weren't aware of it at the time.
So I don't think so.
Okay.
Actually, I think it's super useful now that I can look at it from that lens.
Yeah.
It's totally useful that becoming a social worker, going to get my master's in social work specifically, and now being almost done with my doctorate in social work. These skills that I didn't necessarily have, that were kind of absent in my very logical brain, as someone with autism. Just my brain works on a logical processor most of the time versus the emotional processor. It's kind of how I see it. That it added a lot of those skills that just don't come to me naturally. So better emotional expression and just the communication skills to connect with people on a deeper level. And it's not that I hadn't ever been able to connect with people on a deeper level, but there were probably mistakes I made that I just could not recognize. So I realize now that I look back, I'm like, okay, so this is something that fills in blanks for me and gives me a lot more tools to be an effective communicator and better, well-rounded human being.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I hope that you, like, as you look at your past, you're not like, I could have done that, or, like, not getting to that point, but it's just, I think if anything, it's bringing you awareness now of just like, oh, well, that's how I acted, or this act, but it all makes sense because of what you've learned recently about yourself. Something you just said, which is the balancing of the logical and emotional, is is a hell of a challenge. I haven't received full testing, but I know that my balance is definitely off as well. I approached, I forget what the actual test is you take to see, okay, well, where do you land professionally and how do you analyze things? But I'm curious from a relationship perspective, because you were just saying, okay, obviously you're entering into a polyamorous relationship now. You're in the thick of it. The balancing of logical and emotional, what is that like? Especially when encountering, is it time bases, or how do you logically approach, since that's typically what you would tend to go towards this new adjustment?
So, I mean, my intro into polyamory was very logical.
Yeah.
And like I can look back at now and go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense that I said that. Because when my spouse presented it to me as an idea and wanted my thoughts on it, my initial reaction wasn't no, it was let me think about that, which is a good response to a lot of things.
Yeah.
Word to the wise. Let people know you'll think about it. It's okay to not have an answer right away. Great life lesson.
Yeah, that hands down. I mean, Mr. Rogers lived for that. He'd always give pause between every statement that he would make. So definitely give yourself that pause for sure.
And I thought about it, and it only took a few, I mean, it was a couple, maybe 2-3 days of thinking about it before I came back and I realized, the idea of monogamy, which sure, it may work for some / most people, or people haven't given themselves the chance to actually explore otherwise, because of that's just how they were raised. It's what they know. But the idea that we are supposed to be everything for one other person for the rest of our lives is totally unrealistic and illogical.
It's a lot of burden to carry, to be honest. It's a lot of expectations.
And I can't meet all of my spouse's needs, so they can have somebody else or multiple other people who help with that. That's awesome. Takes the burden off of me. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's a less burden for me, and I get to be happy knowing that their needs are met, which is, I think, the biggest challenge for most people, is feeling what we call the opposite of jealousy. There's a word for it in the poly community. It's called compersion. It's just the opposite of jealousy. It's like, I'm happy that my partner is getting their needs met and is happy with another person and me, or multiple people and me.
That's the first time I've ever heard this term. So once again, what is it? It's compersion, you said?
Yep, and it's phonetic, so it's COMPERSION.
And it's and once again, it's the concept that it's like a respect concept. It's like the acknowledgement of the partner you're with or the person you care about, that you can't fulfill everything for them. So that they require additional needs, whether that's a person or other habits, other jobs, whatever it is, could be applied. But it's a term for the polyamorous community.
Yeah, and it can be generalized too as there's literally a website called whatiscompersion.com,
which I'm going to pull up on the side here.
It defines it as the wholehearted participation in the happiness of others. Ooh. Even when their positive experience does not involve or benefit us directly. It can be thought of as the opposite of jealousy and possessiveness. It requires us to see other people as autonomous and self-determined, and not that we are like these bonded units that can only function together once we've become engaged in a romantic relationship.
It's a abandonment of, well, not an abandonment, rather. It's just it's becoming selfless instead of selfish, and it's really understanding what you just highlighted, that we're all existing on our individual planes, and we are going through our existence, and we have various needs and wants, desires, etc. But it's stepping away from that selfish aspect, and you've always been somebody who is incredibly selfless. When I think of, we were talking about Ogiku just a bit ago, but this stems back to your roots. Like, you have always been a selfless person, thinking of others and placing others often before yourself in a lot of cases. So as you were highlighting, like, getting in touch with the emotional and understanding, and even as you're exploring for yourself, like, what are you looking for in a partner? What needs, additional things do you need? When was the first experience for you that you saw this selflessness come through?
That's a good question. Because I can think of some very formative memories in which that selflessness came through.
Yeah.
None of them were good situations.
Yeah.
they usually had to do with protecting somebody else from physical harm.
Yeah.
So, growing up in a physically abusive household, I didn't want to see what happened to me happen to my younger siblings.
Yeah.
Specifically, my little sister, who also just got recently diagnosed with ADHD, and who will be coming to visit me on Sunday for.
Well, there we go. Family unite. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll probably do some broadcasts with her. Actually.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, because she'll be here, and I'm taking the whole week off of work.
Heck yeah.
So
heck yeah.
Plenty of time to do that. But there were a lot of times where I literally removed her from a situation and locked her in my room with me, where it wasn't about me. I could have done nothing, but I just hated to see it.
But you made your sister safer in those moments.
Yeah, and my door wasn't even supposed to have a lock on it, but it did.
Because you installed it, right?
Because the contractor who built my parents' house, my mom designed the house. The contractor was like, a 13-year-old boy is going to live in this room. I'm going to give him a lock.
Yes, desperately needed, especially with the advent of the internet. Oh my God, if there wasn't a lock on my door, things would have been seen.
Of course, we didn't actually have whole house internet until probably like 3 or 4 years later. We had one computer that connected directly to the modem, and that was it. And that was in the family room next to the TV. So not exactly the greatest place.
Not the place for you to go on rotten.com back in the day. Which I hope doesn't still exist. Because I saw things I can never unsee. So you obviously you made it through obviously all the trauma. And you discovered that you effectively were protecting family at that point. You then got out.
It was actually hard to leave home because I left for college early. I skipped my senior year of high school, because I originally wanted to be a pastry chef, and so I went to school, but I did so very reluctantly because I felt like, well, who's going to protect my sister while I'm gone? Yeah, because my older sister was already in college because she's 2 years older than me, so she was 18 at that time, and I mean, she also wasn't the kind of person to step in. She's very, very non-confrontational and much more like just shy, introverted, less open to conflict. She's a very non-confrontational person, and so is my brother-in-law or spouse. Yeah. So I remember there was a day, and it was also another day where my grandparents were visiting my dad's parents, who lived not that far away, 45 minutes from where we were. Yeah. And I had isolated myself because I was just so distraught about the idea of leaving. And my grandma came into my room. So I had my room that connected to my bathroom that connected to my closet. Yeah. Which is a good design because you don't have to go out into your room to go get dressed. You can stay in your bathroom, essentially. Smart planning. I can actually thank my mom for a couple things, that one included. Yeah, no, that's a very good thing. I unfortunately have to walk around my place naked all the time. I can't find my clothes. Whoever designed this place, I don't know where I put my clothes. See, my spouse gets that benefit because the two adults here are their partners. I can't walk around naked because their partner doesn't want to see that. Oh, well, hey. We're gonna switch to it. For them. We're gonna switch up the community type. No. So it was a difficult decision though for you to effectively transition towards the future for yourself. So to be selfish at that point for yourself, it was tough. Yeah, and I mean, I didn't see it as a selfish decision. I mean, I still, I also like to try to redefine the word. It doesn't necessarily have to have a negative context, or we can just use that it was a smart self-care sort of decision. I like that because not only was I removing myself from that environment where I continued to get re-traumatized, I was trying to start my life outside of under my parents' roof. Yeah, no, and it was. I'm so glad that I chose to do that, even though it's not what I ended up wanting to do professionally. And I found that out very quickly after being in class for just a few days, although each of the classes there were 6 hours long.
Oh my heavens. So and what were you doing
18 hours of instruction.
18 hours of instruction with pastry? Because that was the initial goal.
So the first class was classical French pastries.
Okay.
And we started the class by making, what was it? Making puff pastry dough.
Oh my
which is notoriously challenging.
Yes. So that's the first class. It's like Carnegie Mellon. I feel like they give like, hey, build an OS, an operating system from scratch to the first years. They threw you right into the deep end of pastry making.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the, you said it took several days for you to realize, you know what, maybe puff pastry ain't my path.
And it was just the overwhelmingness of the entire experience, because it was an hour of instruction sitting down, and then 5 hours of on your feet working in a professional kitchen, which I'd never done before, using full professional equipment, having to be dressed to the nines very specifically. Like, everybody had to literally line up in the kitchen when they got there, and the teacher, the chef, inspected everybody's outfit to make sure it met the very specific standards.
This is the military of pastry making. It sounds like
that's what it felt like. That because we had the little hat, because we obviously didn't have big hats because we're not big important chefs. So we had our little hats. We had our neckerchiefs that had a specific ring that had to be on them, so they had to be rolled and then put through the little ring pointing down. We of course had our chef's coats. We could wear whatever undershirt we wanted under it, as long as it was white. We had our very specific pants that they gave us. I think we had 3 chef's coats and 2 pairs of pants, which was not very convenient for having 4 days of class a week. So you had to constantly doing laundry, a little belt. We had to have 2 towels on, one like on each side hanging in front of our legs.
Jeez.
And the specific shoes that they gave us, because they gave us the uniforms as part of the intro, and then we always had to bring our knife kits that they also provided as part of the tuition.
Oh my god. Okay, so you're escaping the home life, which was incredibly traumatic. You're dealing with that. You're stepping into a scenario of a thing that you love, baking, and you're stepping into effectively the military. When was the moment that you realized, I need to go this way instead? What was that?
I mean, the end of the second day of instruction, I was like, this is too much. I can't handle it. I went to talk to my advisor for the program, because I was in a special program to be able to go at the age of 16 and skip my senior year. They had this special program for high school seniors to do just that. And so I went to talk to my advisor, and she's like, don't give up yet. Just, I know it's overwhelming. This is your first time away from home. You're only 16. Like, you're in a different state, because I was in Colorado, in Denver. And of course it's overwhelming, but we'll switch you to like your gen ed classes, and then you can think about it next semester, essentially. So, I missed a few days of instruction from my first classes, but I caught up pretty quickly because I excel in that area, and that wasn't a problem at all. So what ended up happening was that I decided on my own that I didn't want to return to those classes. So I just switched my major to some random thing, which happened to be marketing at the time. It was just like, whatever I can switch it to, so that I can just take the classes that I need to take before I go back home, which is what I did. So I stayed there until the end of February of the following year, which was 2007. So I went back home in the beginning of 2007, hung out for a little while, and went to my graduation, because I went back home and graduated from high school, still got to walk, even though I wasn't an enrolled student technically. They still let me go do graduation and all that. And then I started at my community college that summer and continued to try to figure out what I wanted to do, which led me to computer science initially, and then to psychology in that realm. And then what led me to apply to my undergrad program in psychology that then I had changed before I even got there, to what I actually graduated with as far as my bachelor's, which was social and behavioral sciences. With a minor in social work, then leading me to a master's in social work, and now leading to almost completing a doctorate in social work.
Hell yeah. Oh, I can't wait to see Dr. Unigeek out in the space, doing what you do. If we look at that path of, okay, so you went from wanting to like bake, and it's something of which you had a love to, transition to marketing, transition to computer sci, because obviously computers were an important part of your journey, still are to this day as a broadcaster. Yes. To then transitioning to psychology. So it's interesting actually transitioning from computer science to psychology. So I guess what was that transition that you were just like, there's something, I mean, granted, computers are just brains that you're ultimately like trying to get them to do some sort of behavior or to act in a certain way or to do an action for you. Was there a connection you found between the two, or was there another moment that was just like, I want to go that way?
So I remember having a conversation with my mother about still feeling like I wasn't in the right place and like wasn't going the right direction, like the direction that I wanted to. Not that there was necessarily a right or wrong direction, but just it still didn't feel like the right thing to do for me. I talked about teaching and the idea of teaching, and that I liked it, and I still do. And I've done teaching. I've done some elements of teaching in various places that I've worked, and I do love it. And it's one of the reasons that I'm getting a doctorate. And my mom asked me when I said that, like, well, what would you want to teach? And I didn't know, but then I thought about it, and the area of psychology was the most intriguing, looking at things that were taught. I talked to my friends, peers, about classes that they took, and like, what were some of your most interesting college classes so far? What were the things that you really liked in high school? And there was an overwhelming majority of people from my high school who said the psychology, teacher and that class was the best. Like, it was so cool to learn about all this stuff. And so I started looking into that more, which also coincided with, and I, obviously I don't have time to tell that whole story, but my reconvening with my late best friend. And I know you know more about the ins and outs of that because we've talked about it.
I'd say give a real quick background for the crew who hasn't heard us talk in the past about this.
Yeah, my late best friend, I met her when I was 8 in 4th grade. She had cystic fibrosis, which is a chronic lung condition, genetic, born with it. Some people it's severe, some people it's not so severe. For those who it is more severe, it generally is going to lead to their death. She had a double lung transplant at 16, and she died when she was 22, which was at the end of 2011. But her, like, we met in elementary school, but because of her health, she wasn't really very present throughout most of my school years. And when I came back from Denver is actually when we really reconvened, because I had that downtime between February and June when I didn't really have anything to do. So I just went to my school campus, even though I didn't have a student ID. And that was the year they started making everybody wear them on their person visibly at all times. So I just ducked the security all the time and hung out in one of my favorite teachers' classrooms, which was the Mac lab. So it was just a computer lab, and I just hung out in there and played around with some of the programs, made some silly films, took some great green screen photos.
Yeah.
But I also spent every lunch with this group of people that included her. And so we became very close, and I considered her my best friend. And then I got to really learn about all the insights of her life, that she was a foster youth, that her life involved a lot of social workers because of that, and because of her chronic health condition. So I got to meet a lot of them who were either still in her life or came back into her life, and saw the dedication that these individuals put into her well-being. It's like, this is awesome. I want to do that. Like, I want to bridge these gaps. After growing up under, or like in the house with a doctor, like my father's a physician, and knowing how much people really love him because he's a very popular physician. Like, people love him as a physician. They will constantly go to him. They won't see other practitioners at his practice. Like, they'd rather wait 3 months to see him than see somebody tomorrow at his practice. They are very dedicated to him, and he does a great job. and it shows. And he very much cares about people. He's just not as good at emoting it. But it shows in his work. And I realized that I could do both of those things. I could take care of people, care about people, and show them that I care in meaningful ways, kind of all in one package.
Yeah. And you, when did you start doing the social work? Like start working directly with individuals?
So that my first social work experience was 2012. My first internship as part of the master's program, which was in a methadone clinic. That was definitely an interesting experience for anyone who doesn't know. Methadone is a medication that's used as an opiate replacement therapy. So people who are addicted to opiates or heroin, they can go to one of these clinics to safely remove themselves from that environment. Some people really poo-poo it because they're just like, oh, well, you're just replacing one addictive thing with another addictive thing. And there's some level of validity to that, but they're also helping them get socially out of dangerous situations where they're involved with people who are using drugs and people who are dealing drugs, and the higher crime instance that tends to come with being involved in those communities. Not to say that these people don't have value, because they absolutely do. They just have the ability to make choices that hopefully will lead their lives in a better direction by getting this kind of treatment.
Yeah.
Some people are able to taper off of the methadone and move on. Some people are able to stick with the program indefinitely because they have to.
Wow.
Like we had people who came in, they're like, oh, I've been using heroin for 30 years. They're not going to likely be able to get off of methadone at any point in their life because their brain chemistry has been so permanently changed by the use of opiates that there's nothing that they can do. And it's better for them and safer for them to get this medication than to use heroin.
That's an interesting, like, as you're talking about the effectively rewiring of the brain that occurs from some of the individuals that you are going to see and work with and work through their rehabilitation, or rather their reintegration away from opiates. As an individual who thinks logically and understands things logically, once again, chef, go into computer sci, go into psychology. What are the difficulties in your line of work working with somebody who, because of this rewiring, may not be thinking logically, or they may have like just a different way of view? Like how do you find that balance? Because there's a lot of issues we know right now with conversations that happen all across the United States. People aren't aligning. They just say, oh, this is my perspective, this is my perspective. And you have to find kind of that middle ground to try to connect with them. That sounds incredibly difficult to me, what you're doing.
It is. And especially when, I'd say a majority of my clients have very similar beliefs to my personal beliefs, which is helpful. Yeah. It's not mandatory by any means.
Yeah.
But I also am licensed in Oklahoma, which, the the political stance there is very well known.
Yeah.
And it's, it's a majority. It's obviously not everybody, but it's a majority. And I had the day after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I had one of my clients there in Oklahoma who is an over 60s man who grew up with fundamentalist Christianity, but is also experiencing gender dysphoria.
No kidding.
But who still kept the exact same very strict stance on abortion.
Wow.
But he prompted it. He prompted me to have the conversation because he asked what I thought of the decision, which I immediately turned back on him. And I said, well, what do you think that I think?
That's what
because I didn't want to, didn't want to suppose and just like
Correct.
throw that out there.
Correct.
So, and he's like, well, I asked you first. And so I gave a more neutral answer.
Yeah.
But a factual answer, which was that this is a negative decision this decision negatively impacts women's autonomy in the country.
Yes. I mean, that's a fact. That's factual.
About that.
That's factual. Yeah. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. When, I guess when a patient is sort of trying to flip it back on you, like what you did there was just like, oh no, present it back to them in another form of a question, I guess. um, how I'm trying to think of like how do you get the patient or the individual that you're speaking with rather to um internalize their thoughts, because oftentimes like a lot of conversation is just the external megaphone experience. We've talked about that in the past, but with these, like, especially for somebody who's experiencing, as you said, they're curious about their gender, or they're even having issues with that, how do you get them to internally reflect in conversation?
A lot of the time it's about asking them what brings them here. What keeps you coming to sessions? If you want to continue to experience your worldview that's causing you distress or this or that, like, I'm not here to end the distress for you. I'm here to help you help yourself. Like, that's the profession of social work in a nutshell. We are helping people help themselves.
And I think there's a big disconnect in most people's understandings when it comes to it, because like they think, oh, I will go to therapy or speak with a therapist or a social worker or someone and they'll fix me, is often what people think in their head.
That is a problem. And thankfully, I haven't encountered that incredibly significantly. I have one specific, very strong memory of encountering somebody like that, but I didn't even see them face to face. This was back when I worked through BetterHelp online. And I had like a 2-hour back and forth via text in the platform with this person. They were very in depth they were kind of giving me their whole life story in 2 hours, and then said, well, okay, so what can you do about it, essentially? So
it's kind of like they're looking at you like a mechanic, like, hey, can you just rewire this for me, please?
Yeah. Like, I'm their brain's electrician. Kind of like to think about it that way, because electrical signals make our brain work.
Yep.
And I just explained what therapy is. I said, I'm here to help you explore yourself. And if that means that I'm also here to teach you skills, that's fine. But I'm not here to solve your problems for you, because I can't. They're not my problems. Although some of them may be similar to my problems. And I do share with my clients when I understand where they're coming from, and I can truly, truly empathize. Because there's a lot of empathy that has to come from a therapist to be a good therapist, even when they've never been in a situation that puts them in your shoes.
I was just thinking about that, the empathy aspect. So for empaths at large, those who are especially empathetic or consider themselves to be empathetic, they absorb other people's energy. We've had conversations about this coming out of a few games that I did. You even advised like me placing things in certain locations of my home, so it's like I'm not carrying that burden, I'm placing it over there. There's an exercise my therapist led me through, which is just like the difference between, okay, this is my thought, that's their thought. So like pushing away from my body so there's a clear separation. For yourself, being in the work, I've always been curious about this. How do you maintain sense of self when individuals are coming to you, obviously starting with methadone clinics, now working with people with a variety of things going on in their life? How do you not absorb all of that's coming at you? How do you keep that proper separation? I'm sure it's part of like what the collegiate experience taught you as how to, properly balance. What is the, what is the secret? Give us the secret for us who are empaths.
It's a lot of practice. It's like practice compartmentalizing, because I remember having these conversations with my colleague who was at that same internship with me at the methadone clinic. And she's about at least 15 years my senior. And she would talk to me about her boxes in her brain, like her compartments. And that concept seemed so foreign to me at the time. And it really did take practice. And she had a lot more practice because she had more hands-on experience in the field pre-masters with her bachelor's degree, just working in various environments. And I didn't. I just jumped straight in. And it was a lot of practice. There were plenty of times I brought things home with me and I needed to process them, and it probably would have been a really good idea to have a therapist for myself way before I started doing that.
Okay, but you are doing that
consistently for 3 years now. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So, it's been multiple people because I've moved states. So every time I move, I have to get a new therapist because they have to be licensed in the same state that you're in. So there's that downfall, but I think sometimes it's important to also know when it's time to get a new perspective from a therapist. There's only so much that each person can individually do for you.
So it'll take multiple perspectives and their effectively their life experience in the work to be able to bring to you. I guess to that point, I know there's many people who come into our broadcast, or even myself when I was first exploring my therapy journey. Um, what is the are there key questions you should ask yourself before seeking therapy, or like is there a moment of which you should say, I mean, I think personally, I'll give my belief, I believe every person should have some form of therapy just because of the exposures of what we have, especially with social media and everything. So that's me standing on my soapbox for a moment. But is there usually a question that leads you to this?
Well, I'm going to reframe what you said first, and then I will go.
Yeah, no, please.
It's about the shoulds. So one of the things that I teach most of my clients is about avoiding should statements so that we can stop shoulding all over ourselves, which is a great mnemonic. Keep that one. It's great. You'll
hear that, internet? Stop shoulding on yourself.
Yeah, stop shoulding all over yourself. Because when we should, we place these expectations, and then when we don't live up to those expectations, our self-value, our self-worth just goes down. And it might be something as simple, and especially during a pandemic, like it might be something as simple as I should go grocery shopping today, and then you don't get around to it because you don't feel like it. But then you feel like a bad person because you've said, well, I should do it. I'm perfectly capable. Well, but are you? Are you really depressed? Are you especially fatigued today? But we don't consider those actual factors because it just, it's easier to be negative and to say, well, I just, I can do it. And I didn't. I specifically chose not to. I'm lazy and invaluable. So that's a short lesson on should statements. It also goes into laziness, which I don't actually. There's this whole school of thought of laziness not being an actual thing. That it's really just a lack of appropriate motivation.
That's a great point, because oftentimes when we're lazy, and this was actually something that at Carnegie that they said to me as well. That it's like in my brain, I'm like, oh, I want to direct. Let's just say I want to direct a musical like Phantom of the Opera, right? I'll put that in my brain. Why am I not? Why am I not trying? Am I lazy because I'm not? No, there's probably some other, as you just said, a lack of motivation. Do I actually want to direct that show? Or is it once again an application of a should statement? Oh, I should direct a show like that so I can make the money. Do I want to do that?
Right. And that's exactly where it comes back to. And you did that perfectly. So good job.
There we go.
We change shoulds into wants.
Yeah.
And it comes back to how our brain processes information. If you want to do something, if I say, I want to go get Taco Bell, I'm more likely to take realistic steps to go get Taco Bell.
Yes.
But if I say I should go get Taco Bell, well, why? What is my motivation to get Taco Bell other than I know it tastes good?
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second, because there's a want and a need. For me, it's a need for Taco Bell. Yeah. No, but oftentimes people.
But it's not.
Correct. It's not at all. Not at all. But when you think about okay, we'll use the example of grocery shopping. So I should go grocery shopping today, and it's during a pandemic. So we know there's a risk of going out. We don't know what the virus is at the early era. It's probably terror of going outside, all of the things that came with it, like agoraphobia, all the stuff that comes. And so when does it become a need? It's when it comes down to I'm actually out of food in my home.
Exactly. This is perfect to segue into the next point that I usually do in therapy.
Oh, great. Okay, perfect.
Talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Okay, so let's go.
As a concept, Maslow's hierarchy of needs states that we have needs and that they are somewhat tiered in nature, where the bottom tier, kind of think of it like the old food pyramid. The bottom tier is our basic human needs: food, water, shelter, heat, clothing. We need those things. Absolutely. But if I say I need Taco Bell and I have food in my house that I can make, it's not a need, it's a want. It's a desire. But right above that, and the reason that the pandemic as a concept and being isolated was so hard for most people and hard for relationships is because the second tier is safety and security needs. If we don't feel safe and secure, everything above that on the hierarchy suffers. So same with, you think about a homeless individual. Their basic needs are not being met. So everything above that suffers. They're not feeling safe. They're not feeling secure. They're more prone to escalated behavior because they just want to get their needs met. But above safety and security, number 3 of 5 is healthy relationships. So when you don't feel safe and secure, your relationships suffer. Hence why I got so many couples coming to therapy in June and July of 2020.
Yeah, there was a ton. There were so many. And I thought I was blessed because I'm like, oh, Krista and I haven't fought. Well, it turns out, yeah, she left me. So I went through my recent fun of that. But I think it was compounding. And so when it comes to that moment of, I guess, if we're balancing like wants and needs, obviously food, shelter, safety, all of these, at what point, or rather, I'll say this, is there a point at which therapy becomes a need? Mental therapy, or like having a conversation with somebody about mental state, a need?
Yeah, so this wraps back around, which is great because I know that was the original question and I'm really good at tangents.
It was a great one. I mean, that wasn't a tangent. That was, I feel like it was a great flow. We're good.
It's an educational digression.
Yes.
So making the decision to come to therapy, obviously a very personal one. My goal as a therapist is always to have somebody come with no coercion. Sometimes there's a little coercion. I get that, but it's part of informed consent for therapy. It's one of the first things I say to a client, like, by being here today, you are agreeing that you are here of your own volition. Nobody is coercing or forcing you to be here. And that you're here for therapy and not for something else. Those are literally the 2 first things that I'm saying as part of somebody's verbal consent to participating in the process. They also have to sign the physical or, well, digital, usually in this case, forms. Yeah, that also agree to the same. But if they haven't done that yet, they can verbally agree in a first session. So motivation is a big part of it. And of course, exploring what's behind that motivation is really important. Do I just need a space to talk out loud to another person who's non-judgmental and objective? Great. Use therapy for that. Awesome. Do I need specific skills that other people have told me will really benefit my life because they've done it and they're recommending therapy to me? And I think, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Great. That's a place for therapy as well. Do I want to dig through really deep-seated trauma? Okay, therapy can do that too. Do I want to, process how my childhood affects relationships, like romantic relationships in my life? Great, we can do that therapy. There's almost an unlimited amount of reasons that you could come to therapy, and chances are, coming to therapy, you will find more.
And there's
just being there,
and it's getting that first step to going, which I think is oftentimes like there's people who will say, we'll go back to the should statements, I should go to therapy. I just experienced this thing. I should go to therapy. There'll be some people who say, I want to go to therapy. And I think that's making more towards like what you were describing. As soon as you say, I want to, then we're actually putting it towards an action of like, okay, are you going to take the steps? Then there's the fear aspect of, will I be judged? Or, all these other internal factors of, once we open ourselves, and I think this is just an inherent human trait, when we let down our walls, there's the risk, once again, the safety factor.
Yeah, vulnerability is a huge factor.
Do you have anything you can say to a person who would be like, I want to go to therapy, but I'm afraid?
I would say, okay, that's valid. It's totally valid to be afraid to be open and vulnerable with someone who's pretty much a total stranger. I mean, really are. Like, everyone I meet for the first time, we're total strangers.
Yeah.
And, respecting that is our relationship at that point. And I spend that first hour with them building rapport on purpose. And I tell them that, like, I give them an entire lowdown. That's actually the very first thing I do in intake sessions is I tell them, this is what we're going to do today. I'm going to go through informed consent. I'm going to go through the limits of confidentiality in therapy. And then I'm going to give you the floor to let you introduce yourself. And I let them do it for however long they want. If that takes the entire session and I can't do the other things, oh well, they're more important than the other things. And my company might disagree, but I don't care because my code of ethics says that I do what's right by my clients, not what's right by some company that I work for.
Right.
And I've always taken that to heart, to where I've broken a bunch of rules of places I've worked for to benefit my clients. Never really gotten in trouble for it, which is great.
Well, I think there's the balance.
If you're working under other people who are in the same profession, that makes a difference too.
And I think what you're describing is like, for some companies, they'll be like, okay, these are the goals. You want to make sure you accomplish this in each moment. But really what you're saying is, by giving the space to the individual who, let's say, wants to be heard or needs to be heard in this moment, that is more important to their long-term success than, let's say, factors or bullet points that you have to check box as a corporate.
Like getting their, the specifics about their family history of substance abuse. Like, do I need that information right this moment? Probably not.
They'll surface over time. Yeah.
Right. Do I need to know if they've if they've ever been diagnosed with a learning disability in that first session? Maybe not. Like, it's probably not going to be super relevant unless it's a huge part of why they're coming to therapy. A lot of the time in the pieces of history, I'm usually going through and filling in things as they're talking, because a lot of people will introduce themselves with some details that I have to put in anyway. They'll say like, oh, I'm married and I have 2 kids. I'm like, okay, well, that goes into the social history. I'll just fill that in.
Yeah.
And sometimes when they're talking about the issues, they'll say something like, I coped by smoking, and I've smoked since I was X age. And I'm like, okay, that's in there, put that in. Like, and so I can fill a lot of those blanks. And if they're super great clients, they've actually done a lot of that work for me ahead of time, because my system that I work on right now gives people the ability to actually pre-check into their appointment and fill out all of those histories. Right. And do the pre-assessments for the screening for depression and anxiety. They just actually have to do it, and most of them don't.
That's what I did. I honestly, like that when I went into it, and that's when it was at my psychiatrist actually who helped me come to the realization of, yes, I do have PTSD. I do have these aspects that I deal with. But I was thankful for those forms, because it allowed me to reflect on, well, what do I want to discuss in the room based on what I was feeling versus the fear of being thrust into a space with somebody who I don't know to have a conversation. So it actually helped.
It gives you this nice platform to stand on. It's like, okay, it's guided. And, I always let my clients know some pretty basic things as they come up in those first sessions, like telling a client, and I tell every client this, it's always okay to answer with, I don't know. I don't expect you to have all the answers. I don't have all the answers, but I consider you the expert on you. I'm never going to know you as well as you know yourself.
Say that one more time, because I feel like people don't allow themselves, because we live in a society. I start to shout like the Joker. No, but like we are always, I would say a lot of us, I'm going to speak in a general term here. A lot of us have the expectation that we must know an answer. You must know the answer for whatever it is, or you have to have an answer. And unfortunately, I feel like there's a lot of failings up to this point that, like whether it's education based or upbringing, you name it, there's a lot of faults in the process. But we don't have all the answers, but we don't allow ourselves to accept that we don't have all the answers. I think even Brene Brown writes about that in her books.
She does.
I
love her.
Oh, she's wonderful, and I highly recommend read Daring Greatly, those listeners and those who are watching, because that alone is a huge thing to get through in terms of like internet critique. But another aspect is adults would be better off if we could just say, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just as guilty, honestly. But that's because I love information.
Yes.
And I'm just naturally curious by default. And so someone will say, hey, do you know about that? Like, let's say I'm talking to somebody in text or a Facebook chat, and they're like, do you know about this? And I won't say, no, tell me. I'll go immediately look it up.
I do the same thing.
I want to know. And I'm like, oh yeah, now I know about this.
That actually happened last night. I was talking with a friend, and they were listing a website. I'm like, I never heard of that website. I immediately go to it so that way I can absorb as much information as I can. But once again, repeat this factor of, it is okay to say, I don't know. It is.
Yeah. So I tell every client that any question I ask that you don't know the answer to, or even if they don't feel comfortable answering it, they can tell me that too. Like, I don't want to answer that question.
Yeah.
Great. We'll move on. Yeah. I might come back and I'll tell them. I might come back to that later and ask you about the reasons that you don't want to answer that question. But you also don't have to answer that either.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to answer any. This is a voluntary process. The end of the informed consent is you can revoke your consent your voluntary consent to participation in this process at any time. Meaning, it doesn't matter if it's the middle of a session and you just say, bye, I'm done with therapy.
That's it.
That's fine. That is their absolute right as a voluntary participant in this process to leave at any time.
And that's a good reminder to people as well, because people might think, oh, I'm trapped in this room, or I have to give up all my information and all that. So that's also good to reiterate that it's voluntary.
Yeah, I mean, your therapist wants to learn information about you so that they can help you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I see it. Like, the more I learn about my clients, the more insight I get and the more dots I can put together. It's like I'm doing, a dot to dot, literally. Yeah. Like, all the dots are there on the page and they're numbered, but some of them are just missing.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, like, we think about something like trauma, you might have dots like 1 and 100, and then dots like 30 through 70 are just gone.
Yeah.
Like, they've been totally dissociated from existence, and we have to peer into and figure out ways to uncover some of those, even though they may be very traumatic memories. But the things that our brain blocks out, it does so to protect us by nature.
Yeah.
But if it means we can't process them in healthy ways, then they're probably going to haunt us for a long time.
Yeah. And that's the creeping up of PTSD. And that's the stuff that I was like, buried it for the safety purposes, or what I believe to be safety purposes. And that's just really the caveman on us, of just like, oh, don't exit the cave because the saber-toothed tiger's out there waiting for you. And you have to really go through that journey. I do want to open up from the chat any questions they have. I have one. Actually, Melosaurus posted, if your therapist doesn't have a therapist, is that a red flag? Obviously, you're not going to ask your therapist if they have a therapist, but from your perspective, like, obviously you see a therapist on a regular basis to work through, obviously, your own personal journey. Some of it may be associated with work and stuff like that. But would you consider it a red flag if they choose not to go that?
And I have to say no.
Yeah.
Only because maybe they've been in therapy for a while.
Oh.
And also, sister just pointed out you're allowed to ask them. They don't have to answer. That's exactly right.
Okay.
So
got it.
Your specific therapist, depending on their level of comfort, telling you about themselves, which, ideally is minimal, but useful if given, you could ask, like, hey, I heard that it's really good for therapists to have their own therapists. Have you ever gone to therapy? That's probably a better way to put it, is have you ever gone to therapy? That's not asking them, are you currently going to therapy?
Yeah, are you actively, and are you going to go right after the session after I tell you the weird shit that happened to me last night? Yeah, no. Like, that's a good way of phrasing it.
Have you ever been in my seat? Like, because I think that's important for understanding and empathy. Like, yeah. It's okay to ask. I don't think it's a red flag necessarily, though, because maybe they've done it before, they'll do it again in the future, but they're in a happy, good place right now. I'd say that to go on top of that, if they have no outlet, though, and there's no way to know, because ideally your therapist wouldn't be sharing this with you, because that would not be good therapy. But if they have no outlet, like they don't have a good clinical supervisor that they can go to, or another colleague, or somebody within their workplace or setting, or a professional organization or something like that, where they can go and discuss cases, get help if they need it, talk to people from different clinical specialties. If they have absolutely nobody, then that would be a red flag. But you're not going to find out that information, ideally.
Let's talk about resources for a second, because obviously, let's say a person's going on their first journey, or they're listening to this and they're like, you know what, I should go to therapy. I want to go to therapy. I don't know where to go. Where are there resources that you have utilized in the past or have linked in the past that you're like, if you want to speak to a specialist or to speak to someone, check out these resources? Do you have resources that you typically would point towards?
So, I mean, naturally, I'm biased toward the place I work because I actually love it.
Yeah.
And they take insurance.
There you go.
That's a benefit.
That's even better. Yeah, because that's also a thing, too, because people think, oh, therapy is going to cost me an arm and a leg, and medical bills are already terrifying, and maybe financial issues people might be experiencing, because obviously, the pandemic, and now we're going into a recession, there's a lot of fear around money.
Right. I recently participated in therapy with my spouse, and the therapist we found, we wanted a very specific expertise because we wanted somebody who was very comfortable with and had worked with polyamorous individuals, because that's important because it's such a unique dynamic. He's like, I don't bill insurance directly. I'll have to charge you, and then you can submit it, a super bill after the fact, to your insurance. So thankfully, I'm in a financial place where that's fine, and we got all of the money refunded after the fact, which is great. I was happy with my insurance for doing that and refunding everything. But not everybody's going to be in that position, so it's really important to figure out what coverage you have, if any, and of course look for therapists with sliding scale. So if you just like therapists near me with sliding scale fees, if you don't have access to insurance, or your insurance is not going to reasonably be able to cover somebody who's available. I know a lot of clients that I have on the side, because I have my own independent practice that I still run, a small one on the side, are Kaiser patients. And Kaiser notoriously in California, and I know here in Washington, probably in Oregon too, but in most of the states that Kaiser Permanente exists, and not to hate on them because they do good work in plenty of spaces, and they've done fantastic research, and they don't have enough staff for mental health. I had clients coming to me like, I was able to see someone once every quarter.
Wow.
I'm like, well, you can't do therapy once every quarter. I mean, you can barely do therapy once every month, which also other people were doing. Like, really, the furthest I like to go out is a month, and that's for people who are just kind of doing maintenance. They want somebody to talk to. They can see me more often if they need to, but generally it's weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. Those are the standards. So I still am working with people who they are insured, but it's more convenient for them to work with someone who they know is going to be consistent. And offers them good rates, because I specifically try to be as reasonable as possible. And I just actually July 1st raised my rates for the first time in 2.5 years.
Well, there you go. I mean, if anything, keeping your balance going as well is important. You don't want to neglect yourself as part of the process. The I know we shared a link in the broadcast chat for those who are watching on Twitch for the crisis text line, which is so. Can you tell me a bit about the crisis text line? Because obviously this is a resource if a person is in a moment of crisis that they can reach out to. There's a website. There's also a phone number of which you can call from U.S. and Canada. I believe there's international resources as well. But could you tell us a little bit about that resource?
So Crisis Text Line itself, headquartered in New York, I volunteered for them for 3 years. They have 24/7 access by text to crisis counselors, people who are trained. They're not mental health professionals necessarily. Some of them are like me when I was doing that. But the requirement is that you're 18 or older, and you go through their very specific training course, which as a volunteer is at no cost to you. So if it's something you're interested in doing to support your community and the community of people with mental health challenges, is something that anyone over the age of 18 who meets their requirements can do. But you'll be connected with somebody, depending on the time of day and the influx of people, generally within 5 minutes. And conversations on average last up to an hour. They try to cut you off at that point, just as a hint. Unless there's something very, like if you're threatening to harm yourself, they won't cut you. Like if there's a very serious implication of what's going on, they're not going to cut you off, but they are there to help. They're there to provide a sense of comfort, of understanding. They will provide resources if requested, or they'll ask like, hey, I have some resources that might be useful for you. Are you interested? So every conversation is required to start with a suicide assessment. So if you're going to use that resource, please be prepared for that. That wasn't the case when I volunteered for them. They added that later on. Because if somebody was like, I'm just really upset about X, Y, and Z, and that there were no signs that they were suicidal, we didn't ask the questions because we didn't want to make people more uncomfortable.
Didn't want to push them in into those thought processes. I think like around it, like, I guess, how does one define, is this a crisis or not? I guess is the question. If a person is, that was a good question. Because we saw that all the time. Like, oh, I'm kind of sad because I broke up with my
boyfriend or girlfriend or what have you. My significant other was like a high schooler, and they didn't seem that distraught. But I'm like, it's still a crisis to them. Maybe it's their first breakup. Maybe maybe they're just feeling isolated and they don't have much else or any other places to go, and they just saw this link advertised when they were watching a YouTube video to try to cheer themselves up, because crisis text line is pretty proliferative in its advertising. I mean, I used right before I moved, before I moved here to where I am now, there was a bridge nearby, and there's a sign on that bridge that literally has crisis text lines information on it.
That's good.
Like if you're considering jumping off the bridge, contact us instead, please.
Please call this number or like text this number to talk with the professional. They do similar at the unfortunately, community named like the Suicide Forest in Japan, which is near Fuji Mountain. And they have lines. So it's like, please, before you enter into this forest, because what can happen, especially in that forest, it's very dense. You get lost very easily. It's like, please call the authorities if you're looking at this. But it sounds like in any moment of despair, when you don't feel like you have someone to talk to, that's an opportunity for you to text this crisis line. There are operators and individuals able to speak with you on the crisis you're going through.
Also, another very useful resource that I think is now nationwide. It was originally designed and utilized in California through NAMI. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and it's called the Warm Line. So it's it's a step down from a hotline. It's just a warm line, and it's literally just a peer. It's somebody who's gone through some stuff, and they work for the NAMI Warm Line, and they're just there to talk, to provide comfort, conversation. You're like, yeah, I get what you're going through, but pre-crisis.
And so there's local resources. Like I'm looking at here, there's one in for California. It looks like it's operating out of San Francisco. It's a confidential 24/7 non-emergency emotional support line for any person who is experiencing these things. And I know that we see this as broadcasters on Twitch. People will come in, they're going through obviously a crisis of some sort. I made dick jokes on the internet for a living. I'm not a licensed individual or even a person trained to handle these types of things. So knowing that there are...
even if you were, you're not wearing that hat.
Correct.
At that moment.
Correct.
I mean, there have been some streams that I've done where I'm like, hey, I am a licensed clinical social worker. Come ask me questions.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying like, hey, I'm doing work right now. Come, present me with your crises.
Yeah.
Because it's just not a good forum.
No, I don't think it's a good forum at all.
And it's actually too vulnerable. Like,
a
lot of the time I'll say, well, I almost never say you can't be too vulnerable, because that's pretty much always true. There are situations where you can be too vulnerable.
Yeah.
And broadcasting crises in a public forum, it gives off a bad vibe to start. It's not the best idea.
Yeah, I'm personally I've seen some of this
to abuse, to various things. I mean, I don't don't intend to see that in your channel, because we're really good at moderating it out of your channel.
Yeah, but, no, I'm very appreciative.
Anywhere.
Yeah, like moderators across the board. God bless moderators on live broadcast systems like Twitch or Facebook, YouTube, you name it, wherever you're doing it, who are able to move conversations in appropriate directions. I'm really appreciative of that. I will agree. I've seen some people who claim to be mental health professionals doing effectively clinic work publicly. That I think that, as you said, it opens up to a lot of vulnerabilities and potential damage that could occur, whether or not it's done in a safe manner between the conversation. I think opening that space is risky. So I've never personally aligned with any of that. As far as like if we were to dive into my personal shit, I'd be like, no, I can't do that live.
Right. I mean, when I've announced, like, put on a stream where I'm doing like chatting but also playing a game, and I put on the title that I am a clinical social worker. Come ask me questions about you can ask me questions about therapy or about being a therapist. And some people ask like, I'm struggling with X problem. What might be a good skill for me to look into? Like, I can answer those things because I'm not prescribing something. Essentially, I'm not giving them any kind of mandate. I'm just saying, hey, check this out.
You're not prescribing and you're not diagnosing.
For you.
Yeah, you're just like, hey, here's additional resources to point towards. There's actually a question from Melisors that came up just a bit ago. In case for these people like who don't have insurance, for individuals who don't have insurance, are there any resources out there for low cost if it's not an emergency? Well, it sounds like the 2 helplines are a good start for at least navigating the immediate crisis.
And the Warm Line will also be able to direct you toward resources.
Okay.
One of my favorite resources that people really overlook is 211. I mean, every state has their own 211. So, like California, I think it's 211ca.org.
Okay.
You can call them literally at 211, or you can go to each 211 website, depending on what state you're in. Like the one in Oklahoma is called the Oklahoma Heartline. But they all have 211 as their core piece of it, and they're all supported, I believe, by the United Way organization.
Yeah, it is. So I'm looking at it right now.
Afloat.
Yeah, 211.org is the website that's about it. Just call 211. It's similar to like calling 911 in the case of like a physical emergency or something happening. But it looks like they can help you with finding food. If you're seeking food resources, mental health resources, people who are new to the United States.
Yeah, it's literally anything that would be like if you need help paying your bills, finding food, if you need things related to disaster recovery, utility assistance, mental health,
that's huge.
Specific programs and benefits, like any kind of social services related thing. They're experts on it.
What's fascinating, this is the first time I've ever heard of this service. And I think that is unfortunate. Like when I think of, obviously we all grow up and like 911's taught to us, and mostly in schools, is like call 911 in the case of like emergency, fire, you name it. But people don't think, like oftentimes people will be like, oh, I have to create a GoFundMe immediately, or I have to do this. Like we go towards what the social sphere is telling us. And this is something of which I think, more broadcasters or other, talk shows could even talk about, like, hey, this is an additional resource for you to find the path that you would like to get back on, or if you're just needing that additional assistance or direction. I think that's a fantastic resource to point out, is 211.org, and see what they're about.
And not only that, when you click on the mental health area 211, it'll say, it starts with, if you're experiencing an emergency, call 911 first.
Yep.
Then it goes into what 211 can do in 180 languages upon request.
Yeah.
And then other mental health hotlines, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Veterans Crisis Line, Crisis Text Line is on here, then the Trevor Lifeline for LGBTQ plus youth, and then the Trans Lifeline as well.
That's great. That's a wonderful resource. Another question from Miradel. What are your thoughts on online therapy sites? Well, you've worked on these online therapy sites in the past, and currently do, like, obviously we're all in a digital landscape. What would be the pros and cons of an online conversation versus being in person in the standard, what people expect, like, oh, you sit in the chair and have a convo?
Right. So at this point, the research has shown that teletherapy can be just as effective as face-to-face therapy. So it comes down to preference and comfort. Obviously, you're going to have a lot more options if you look online and are doing something, teleworking related or, telehealth related, like my clients do. I'm in the state of Washington. I'm not licensed in the state of Washington, so I don't work with Washington clients. But I work with clients right now in California, Oklahoma, Utah, and Wyoming, soon to be Alaska, North Carolina, and Arkansas as well. Those are pending. So I have the ability to get these licenses and work in multiple states, and therefore assist more people. And my company that I work for right now, their specific goal is to have people licensed in more rural states, or states with a very large rural area, like as far as total, the total area of a state that is mostly rural, like North Dakota, like Oklahoma, like Wyoming, and so the more empty states.
So
because North and South Dakota both have under North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming, all three of them each have under 1 million people in them.
Oh my God, that's
So,
that's significantly less than the county I live in.
Right. I mean, the whole state of Oklahoma is only 4 million people, which is still less than LA County.
Wow. But the factor is, regardless of where you are, there are resources available to you, whether it's the text resources, services like 211, online therapy conversations are fully accessible regardless of where you're at. And so it really comes down to, and I think this is the element that I'm really taking away from this conversation, is stepping away from this concept of I should. There's an expectation placed, or I should be doing this for myself, or da 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 da. It's like, I should be eating better. I shouldn't be eating Taco Bell every single day. I shouldn't be. It's no. Transition it into, do you want to do this? And does it help you with fulfilling your needs as an individual?
Right. What are my needs? What are my desires? What are these individual things that I'm doing for myself give to me? You know, being mindful about these things. I'm doing things with a purpose. When I sit down at my Lego table over here and I build Legos, what's the reason I'm doing that?
Yeah.
Well, there's many. Well, I don't know many, but there's multiple reasons.
Yeah.
One, it's self-care. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that's valid. That's actually, we didn't get to the other 2 tiers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but above relationships is achievement, and above that at the very top is self-actualization, which is doing things purely for the joy of doing them. Which, like Legos, totally superfluous, right? Like, I, as an adult, am not learning anything necessarily from building Legos, although in this case I actually am, because I'm doing complex technic sets and reverse engineering.
You're like, I said something, but now I'm reverting because I did learn stuff from it.
Yeah.
But it is
but in general,
self-enjoyment.
I like to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm building something that I know my son is going to enjoy playing with me when I'm done, because I'm building a big construction truck right now, and he loves trucks and cars, and that he's almost 4. He's obsessed with everything that's vehicular.
And with every completion, that's an achievement as well. I finished that.
So I'm also achieving like each step. I mean, I'm on step, I can look over step 554 right now.
Oh my heavens. It's like me trying to fight bosses in Elden Ring. It's each one, although it's a grind, it's a sense of achievement once you're able to learn.
And what I like about building toys in particular, and why I still flock to them as an adult, is because each step is its own little achievement, and you can put it down at any time. So if I get distracted, it's okay, because I can come back and I'll be right where I left it.
Yeah.
Unless my cat comes and messes it up.
Oh my God. Oh, the cats are always doing that. This has been an incredible conversation. I think an incredibly valuable one for a lot of the listeners, especially those who are exploring therapy on their therapy journey, are curious about therapy, curious about resources. Obviously, your journey has showcased from a point of being selfless for the care of others. Early on in your age, you're still doing that professionally as an adult, and you're still learning in this new journey that you have through polyamorous relationship to do the same for yourself. And that's what has always been so commanding about, seeing you in action, doing what you do, is you've always done that, whether it was the broadcast for the Children's Hospital Los Angeles that we continue to do year after year, whether it is through the work that you do in your own broadcast, in the fruition of the community that is Unigeek, birthing from the rubble that was Ogiku, because I ran out of money.
The ashes.
I ran out of everything.
We are the phoenix of Ogiku.
You are, and you're still flying, and you're flying strong. And so it's just, that's what's so impressive about you and everything you've accomplished. So one, I want to thank you for all the time that you've given to this conversation, for your vulnerability in this conversation, for opening up on some things of which you shared with the chat. But overall, you're incredibly impressive in what you're able to do and what you continue to do. So I give you a stage if you'd like to share a thought with the audience. In summation, if you can give them a gem, what is that gem that we can unearth from the earth right now?
I gave so many already.
I know you gave me all the diamonds, and I'm like that asshole in Hollywood who's like, "What's next? What else you got for me?" I pull out my stogie and I'm sitting there smoking it.
when I think of diamonds, I think of Minecraft, though. So
there you go. I think of assholes in Hollywood.
Diamonds, and I just ran out. That it's good to have conversations with other people. Like if you have firsthand experience, you're already like, therapy's great. It's great for me. Going in expecting other people to agree with you is not, it's not a good place to start from. Going in without as many expectations, or just say, like in that neutral headspace, it's hard. It's really hard to be objective in that way. We're not really used to it. I'm very used to it because it's my job. But going in with that neutral space, and I think it's actually like life lesson across the board. I go into movies, I go into video games, all kinds of media without expectations. I avoid a lot of trailers. This is something I'm just super stoked about. And I find that things that people just say, oh, this was bad, I hated this. And I'm like, I'll think at least it was okay, or I'll even think it was good, because I didn't have some preconceived notion about it. And I find that objectivity just makes life so much more enjoyable.
I like that. Also a Brene Brown thing. Ignore the critics. Think about the people that are in the arena. No, but that's a very good way.
To be fair, Brene Brown is a doctor of social work, like I will be soon, and is literally my favorite social worker and one of my favorite people. So yes, I do take a lot of inspiration from her. Anytime somebody doesn't know the difference between empathy and sympathy, I point them to a video on YouTube that is voiced by her. It is this really cute 3-minute animated video that I highly recommend as well. You can just go to YouTube and type empathy versus sympathy. You will find it. It's the first or second result on there.
Unless Mr. Beast did spending $100,000 on empathy and sympathy. YouTube.
Yes, that would definitely take precedent, as much as I do enjoy Mr. Beast videos.
I just want to know how he makes all the money. Once again, Josh, this has been incredible. Thank you for having this time, for answering some of the audience questions for this. You're, I will excuse the French, you're fucking beast mode at what you do. So thank you again for spending this time with me.
My last thing is just, if anyone is in the Kawaii Discord, see my name pop up in there, feel free. You can also join my Discord, which is Unigeek's. It's Unigeek Discord. If you're interested, you can private message me on Discord or on Twitch. I actually have a private locked, just like the voice channel we're in right now, just for mental health chat. So sometimes, like, if people just really need a conversation and an open ear, and I'm available, I try to do that for them. But really, if you need some guidance or resources, or you have a situation for yourself or others, and you just want somebody to help point you in the right direction, and you prefer a somewhat familiar face, I'm happy to be that person for you.
I love it. And that familiar face has incredible green hair now, which I fully approve, because you know how I am with color. Thank you again, Josh.
Thank you for having me here. I really do appreciate being able to share about myself, which I don't get to do as much because of what I do. So talking about myself is fun.
Beautiful. Thank you all for listening. We will see you at the next episode. Have a great day and even better tomorrow, everybody.